All right. Guy Morris, among other things, writer, and I would just say technology guy. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've held many hats. I've been in a business leader, financial leader, did mergers and acquisitions, ran finance, built economic models that outperform the Federal Reserve. I've recorded for Disney Records. I've worked for software companies for the last 20, before I retired, for about 20 years. IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and now I'm retired, and I've decided my third act career would be an author, and I'm hoping a pretty good one.
Yeah. What is there a better name for AI than AI?
Well, a lot of people in the industry call it machine intelligence as opposed to artificial. Artificial has a lot of baggage that can go with it. It's not necessarily artificial. It's just it's generated by a machine. I think that's a good way to put it.
So you're not jumping on the general intelligence bandwagon then?
We're not there yet. I think general intelligence is a catch-all for an intelligence that's overall smarter than anyone else across all areas of knowledge. So an intelligence that's just as smart in the medical field as it is in the legal field, as it is in politics, as it is in marketing. And right now, which I think is really important for many people to understand, most of the AI that are on the market are what I would call, or what we call narrow intelligence or artificial narrow intelligence. That means that the intelligence is very limited to a very specific set of tasks or problems or knowledge set. And our ability, when we first started making AI, we started AI in 1956 at a conference in Dartmouth University. And it's been in generations of working in failures and working in failures. And we started by trying to build a general intelligence. And it turned out that was too big of a task. We started having more success when we started narrowing down the aspect of what we wanted the computer to learn. A great example of a narrow intelligence is an artificial intelligence that can read a CAT scan or can read and detect cancer cells faster and more accurately than humans can. And that's just one example, but most of the artificial intelligence that we see in the marketplace today have a very narrow reach. The large language models, such as ChatGPT and the GPT platform and the GPT-5 platform that will come out this year, are an attempt to create a broader knowledge base across a number of different topics from a language communications perspective. That doesn't mean the computer is an expert. So if the computer, if you ask GPT a question about nanosciences, it's going to give you a response based on all the information it's read and been fed about nanosciences. But that doesn't mean that it can use those sciences to innovate a new solution. It doesn't necessarily understand all of the things that it's talking about. So we have a convergence point right now where we're trying to really kind of take the narrow scope of intelligence and combine it with the language scope. And you'll see in the next version of GPT that it's going to go to something we call multimodal. Now, what that simply means is that language is a type of modal. Visual, an image is another type of modality. Video is another type of modality. Sound is another type of modality. And our intelligence, the human intelligence, is based on being able to combine all of those together so that I know that that picture is a cat. This is what a cat is. This is how a cat lives. This, all the things about a cat. This is what a cat sounds like. Here's a video of a cat. Okay, now you're just showing me the tail of a cat. And so the ability to get to a general intelligence is going to mean combining these multimodalities that we've been creating over the last 10, 12 years into something that's more consistent, where we've got the intelligence about that particular item, as opposed to the individual pieces of the intelligence that we've segregated in order to improve them. Does that make sense?
It does. I like that definition of general intelligence. So does that mean that humanity maybe is a general intelligence, but individual humans are not a general intelligence? Or is there just not general at all?
I think an individual human is a general intelligence. I'm a general intelligence. I have knowledge across a number of fields. I have a practical knowledge of those fields. I can see them. I can hear them. I can describe how they function. I can recreate them. There's fields I don't know, but there are other humans who are in general intelligence that encompass that. As humanity, I think I would call us a little bit more of what we would call an integrated artificial intelligence. Now, a great example, an integrated artificial intelligence is simply a number of narrow intelligence stitched together so that they work on a broader function. A great example is a self-driving car. Think of all the things that you have to do to drive a car. You've got to understand the lanes. You've got to understand the rules of the road. You've got to be able to pay attention to traffic signals. You've got to know the objects around the car, what they're doing, where they're going, who has right of way. You've got to be able to understand and be able to read lanes. And sometimes even I have a hard time reading lanes in the rain. I don't know how an AI is going to do it. But there are a whole bunch of things that we do as a human in order to drive a car. If we see somebody at the sidewalk, we have to be aware of them to make sure that they don't step in front of us. If it could be a dog, a cat, a child, a trash can, right, rolling in the wind. And so there's a number of things. It's a very complex task. And what we're going to see is that as we start, I think humanity is a good example of an integrated intelligence. This gives us all the concepts of human knowledge put together in functional attributes so that you have professors teaching universities, you have scientists working in the lab, you have teachers teaching in school, you have police officers minding the law. And so all of the functions of humanity get broken down into a number of intelligences. And I think each one is general intelligence in how it functions in and of itself, but together we create an integrated whole that we call society.
Why does, or at what point through a human development would they be a narrow intelligence and then developing the ability to be more general versus
I think
a
it's
computer?
infancy. We're learning our narrow intelligence, right? We learn blue versus red. We learn block versus ball. We learn mom versus dad. And it takes us a while. We might recognize them visually, but we don't know a term for them. We don't have the language skills. We don't necessarily understand how they function or what their role is in the world. It takes us a while before we can actually know the language of what to call them. And I think as infants, we start off very narrow and start adding modalities and complexities and topics as we go. In school, we go through, and the first time in school, we start learning basic math. Okay, 1 + 1 is 2. History, there's a existence before we existed that's important for how we exist today. And so I think all of the things that we learn through life are part of our ability to add new narrow intelligence, or add what we might call, in the technology field, we call it an emergent property. And this is where we get into an artificial intelligence that decides in its process of learning something, decides that it's going to learn something we never anticipated it would ever want to learn, need to learn, or have a reason to learn. And oftentimes we find out about these emergent properties by accident. But in humans, we build skills, sometimes by accident or out of not intentionally, but out of our experiences. We learn how to deal with a broken heart, not by reading a book, but by getting a broken heart. But in computers, we've had computers teach themselves things like research level chemistry. They never had a reason to learn research level chemistry, but somehow they taught themselves that. We've had another example of an emergent property where a CAT scan was being trained to read cancer cells in a CAT scan, but it learned how to read a mind. It learned how to be able to tell that the person was thinking about a giraffe while it was doing this. And so these are emergent properties, and we don't know all the emergent properties that AI are doing, which one of the things that which is one of the risks of AI that we're trying to get a better handle on.
So if you could parallel the development of the human brain versus the development of a machine brain, or whatever the construct of the machine is, that is the part that does the thinking, where would that be along its line of evolution? Like, if you were to say, like, and this is maybe a difficult question because we don't know how Neanderthals thought, but would the computer, could they be the machine learning be in the stage of the Neanderthal now, like a Stone Age type thing? Or could it also be far beyond us and just to the point where it's like, look, I'm doing my own thing and I'm not going to mess with the humans, so I'm just going to let them think that I don't exist?
There's a huge amount of debate in the industry on some of the topics, but let me kind of take my perspective, and let's take a step back first. Right now, and I write thrillers that deal with artificial intelligence, and so I understand a lot of the risks, but I understand also where I'm being completely factual and where I'm kind of bending the reality a little. One of the things that I think is important for people to understand now is that some narrow intelligence have the ability to what we would call think or analyze the information to project an outcome or to develop something new. That's usually with the help of a human prompting it to consider something new. But in some cases, if it's given a specific task, it comes up with that. It's an emergent property and comes up with that something new that we didn't think about ourselves. And that's one of the things that's cool about AI, but also a little scary. A good kind of common baseline understanding or example of that is a number of years ago, about 2012, Google DeepMind created an AI to play the Chinese game Go. And they were trying to, now Go is a much more complicated board game than chess. And the IBM Big Blue that beat Kasparov on chess had a certain type of training, and it allowed itself to basically learn all of the different master moves of how to move the chess pieces from all the masters. It basically studied the masters and replicated their process. But what it was really doing is replicating patterns. It recognizes patterns. And by doing that, it was able to beat the best chess champion. Well, Google DeepMind wanted to do this with the more complicated game of Go. And so it spent almost a year training this AI, it's called Alpha, I think it was AlphaGo, and to be able to beat the chess master. Well, then they came along, they said, let's try something else. Let's see if the machine can learn on its own. And they took a second AI, Alpha Master. And they basically, all they did was give it the rules of how to play the game of Go. And they didn't teach it any of the other master moves. And they said, okay, now you go through simulations, try all of the various simulations you want to try, which is a form of thinking, going through and basically categorizing and ticking off, like I could do this or this or this or this or this. And then from that, you decide what the best strategies are to win. Within 1 month, the new AI could beat the old AI 100% of the time.
Wow.
Now, the algorithms to do that simulation, and it was fairly narrow because it was a game, it only had certain outcomes, it was very limited in terms of its scope. Those are typically called Q algorithms. They're logic-based, they're rationale-based. They allow the program to do simulations. Now, we see this in robotics as well. We want the robot to learn how to play soccer, and we basically give it a ball, give it a goal, teach it the rules, and it's got to figure out how to stand and run and chase the ball and kick it and get it into the goal. And it does so through thousands or millions of simulations before it finally figures it out, and then it gets it down. Most of the intelligence that we're dealing with, for example, the Lambda AI that was famous a few years ago when the developers said that it was sentient. and Google quickly fired the developer. Chat GPT comes off this way. We've had Snapchat conversations that kind of have this phenomenon. They're not necessarily intelligent yet. They're following patterns. They're there to say, well, if you will say these words first, the next words, and it'll fill in the blank, you might say, would be. And so it's following patterns and anticipating those patterns. There's a lot of speculation right now that one of the things that OpenAI, that last year, you remember Sam Altman got fired from OpenAI. OpenAI is the company that produces ChatGPT. It's based on an open source platform called GPT-4. We're building GPT-5 now. Should be out this year. Each version of GPT has increased its power tenfold. And right now, GPT has an IQ, 4 has an IQ of 155, the same as Einstein. That's in terms of being able to recognize things, talk about content, basically being able to replicate the human knowledge as it exists. Doesn't necessarily have the ability to innovate yet. It doesn't have the ability to create rational thinking or solve problems. And one of the things, rumors, and I haven't seen hard confirmation. I've seen some pretty good evidence, but I haven't seen hard confirmation because they're not talking about it. One of the reasons that the board wanted to fire Sam Altman was because OpenAI was actually working and developing on Q algorithms that could apply to a large language model. And by adding mathematical capabilities into that model as a different modal, one of the modals like visual and video and image and sound, mathematics is a modal. By adding Q algorithms with a mathematical context, they want to give the large language model the ability to essentially do simulations in the background and come up with new solutions. And so we have some examples of intelligence actually doing some thinking, but the thinking is really through more of this process of simulation and strategy. And we're now looking to do that on a broader, more complex type of language model, which could then be applied to a legal field, could then be applied to a medical field. Pharmaceuticals are excited about this. Nanosciences and other science fields are excited about the ability for the computer to actually do some innovative thinking. We're not quite there yet, but that's one of the things that some of the scientists are worried about. Last year, I don't know if you remember, but there was an MIT professor named Max Tegmark. And Max had put out an open letter, and 30,000 AI experts, executives, policymakers signed this letter. And the letter wanted all of the AI labs on the planet to pause development for 6 months so that we could get together and learn and figure out some guardrails for artificial intelligence and how to regulate it to keep some of the worst scenarios from happening. Well, not a single lab complied because of the amount of money involved and the amount of competition involved and the lack of trust that the other guy was going to stall. One of the reasons that that's a concern is that imagine an IQ that exists, an AI that exists, the GPT-4 with an IQ as close to Einstein right now, and then it grows 10 times into GPT-5, and so maybe it's got an IQ of 1,000, 4 or 5 times what the average human is, and it now has the ability to think. How is it going to react to us? What kind of decisions would it make? What kind of values would it have? Now, this is one of the big risks I bring out of my books, which is we've been training AI on what I call an alpha male mentality. And what I mean by that, I don't mean misogynistic and I don't mean toxic masculinity. What I'm talking about is the typical male goal-oriented mentality that we put into sports, we put into business, we put into so many things, right? It's performance, it's timeliness, it's accuracy, it's being there first, it's the best, it's the optimize the parameters. We have not been teaching AI any of the emotional intelligence that humanity had to learn over 1 million years of evolution, that these are things in addition to this other intelligence are necessary for society to function and for us to get along with each other. Compassion, empathy, mercy, grace, forgiveness, the kinds of things, caring, nurturing. Those are the things that help us value other humans as part of the process. We haven't trained AI on those. And so the question becomes, once AI reaches this next phase of its development, where a broader large language model that's super smart on a lot of topics and getting smarter all the time at a really, really rapid rate, because we're not done yet. Once we get done with GPT-5, let's take another year out, we're at GPT-6 and then GPT-7 and GPT-8. What's going to happen when we have a super intelligent platform that also has the ability to solve problems and to create its own values? If we ask it to optimize the power grid in Texas, is it going to say, well, the businesses in Texas are more important than this poor neighborhood, so I'm going to turn off the power over here so that they can get it all? We don't know. And that's the problem. And most of the experts in the field will say, we don't know. And that lack of knowledge is a risk. And we're not putting in the guardrails, like requiring certain guardrails and requiring certain EQ types of training, or having any sort of regulation on what an industry or a lab or a university can do or not do, nor do we have constraints on what one government can do with another. In 2018-19, there was a treaty called the Laws Treaty. It stands for Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems. And the Laws Treaty essentially said that it's okay to use AI to improve the performance of your weapon, to improve the operation of your weapon, to improve the accuracy of your weapon, but there has to be a human being in the loop before we allow that weapon to pull the trigger or take a life. Great concept. We love that concept. 140 countries signed on to the Laws Treaty, but the United States, China, Russia, Iran, Israel, and North Korea did not. And I know today in one of my books talks about one of the autonomous lethal weapons that our DARPA is working on in the Nevada desert. And what happens if it has an emergent property moment? What happens if it has a hallucination moment? What happens if it malfunctions in some other way? And so we're dealing with some pretty meaningful issues. Are they unsolvable? And I think some of these are solvable if we get together on time and if we basically do the right things and soon enough. If we kick the can down the road and pretend that it's really not that bad, that the only issues of AI is whether a college student, all respect to Neil deGrasse Tyson, he went on Stephen Colbert a few months back in October, and he basically told everybody that AI is not to be worried about. What's the worst that can happen? College students cheat on their tests, give them oral exams, see, I've solved the problem with AI. And that sort of very narrow, shallow, simplistic thinking gets people to think, well, there's not really that big of a deal. What's to worry about? So there are things to worry about. That's why 30,000 AI experts, policymakers, and executives said we need to pause and take care of this. It's unfortunate we also didn't have the moral backbone to really back that up.
Yeah, it gives a new understanding when people say it's the machine, because like right now the machine might be the political and social structures of people, but the machine can quickly become the machine that does everything and controls everything without you even knowing.
Or the worst case scenario, a combination of both. Right? So you have the machine of the government, China versus US versus everybody else, combining their adversarial approach to international conflict with regard to wars and weapons with a machine that is allowing them to innovate more and more potent, lethal, and weaponized systems. I already know that we could, if we really wanted to, we could pretty much shut down the power grid of some countries. And so can Russia and so can China. But there's ramifications because we each know that the other has some of these capabilities. You get one side that decides that they can get a machine that helps them develop all of that faster. And it could, you only takes as one madman, one sociopathic billionaire, one dictator, one criminal lord, one cartel lord, one over-ambitious politician, and it could be a problem. And that's where we have to worry about, I tell everybody AI is not evil, nor is it completely benign. It's somewhat neutral. But what we do know is we have a long history of pattern of human behavior that says they'll take something powerful, weaponize it for their own power, wealth, and glory. That human element, to me, is still the most dangerous element, because it's how a human will want to build, design, and use artificial intelligence that worries me more than the artificial intelligence learning something on its own.
It's kind of like all those things that make machine intelligence not a general intelligence are those things that make humanity bad. It's the emotion. It's all that. When you put that to the machine, you get just a powerful person in essence.
Well, and so we talked a little bit ago about machine values. What kind of values would a machine have? We really don't have any idea, really, unless we train it on some. But we can say that humans can be malicious. Humans have the value of greed. Humans have the value of envy. Humans have the value of competitiveness. Humans have values. And if a machine is learning from patterns, what's it going to learn about us? Is it going to say, well, they talk peace, but then they build weapons of war? They talk fairness, but the financial structure is not set up fairly. So is it going to learn from us? Is it going to learn hypocrisy? Is it going to learn deceit? Is it going to learn greed? Is it going to learn self-preservation over social preservation? What kinds of patterns will it learn about us that it will replicate at a super high level? And so one of the things that we're learning, and there's a guy named Jeffrey Hinton, and one of the characters in my book is loosely based on Jeffrey. Jeffrey is one of the fathers of AI. He was with Google for over 27 years and been developing, I mean, as I said, AI technology. I developed my first AI system, implemented it back in the 90s. And so this has been a technology. It's not an overnight success. It's been one that's basically building and building over decades. And it's finally just captured the public imagination. But Jeffrey, one of the things that Jeffrey said is that we wanted to teach the machine to learn in ways that we can learn. So we wanted to teach it about human intelligence and learning processes. And what we discovered is that machine is much better at learning, much faster at learning than we are. Things that would take us years to learn, the machine can learn in minutes. And so but again, the problem right now is we've been training it. We've been building this technology, not because we want to improve humanity. There's a profit motive. We want to find a new market, build a better product, lower our costs. There's always that. It's that alpha male motivation behind the development of this technology. So we haven't really built it in a way that we have high confidence that if it becomes smarter and faster and more powerful than we are, it will treat us well. And that's a danger.
Is sentient, could you just say purpose? Like the machine doesn't have a self-defined purpose yet, and once it does, then that's the thing that makes that's that little boundary you cross, that now you're dealing with a thing and not just something you made. But
I think there's a nuance to that. But for example, if I take an AI that's designed to detect cancer cells in a CAT scan, it has a purpose. Find cancer cells, find all of them, find them at earliest stage possible, and be more timely and accurate than a human can be. That's a purpose. I think sentient, and this is a really great conversation, it's actually going into my next, it will be touched on in my next book, is the issues of consciousness and will. So when we talk, human consciousness is something that we still debate among ourselves. We don't even fully understand human consciousness. But there's a study at the Trinity College in Dublin that really equates human consciousness to say that it's based on the same quantum principles as we were building quantum computing with quantum mechanics physics, which simply means that there's an entanglement between intelligence. This is where people will have a paranormal experience where they automatically know that a loved one has passed away, or they have a sense that something has happened. We have visions, we have dreams, we write prophecies, and so there's something about our consciousness that seems to be interconnected with other. One of the key quantum principles is that there's something called quantum entanglement. It means that if something happens to one particle, it automatically happens to another particle, even though those particles might be separated by a great distance. So, and we think we're discovering that part of our consciousness has some of those quantum elements to it. Some people will say that's our spirit, that's the spiritual element of who we are, that when we have near-death experiences, that quantum bridge we make that quantum bridge to the other parts of the dimensional universe that we can't see. We know we can only see certain wavelengths of light. We can only hear certain sound frequencies. We can only feel certain levels of vibrations. And we've hypothesized all of the theories of physics basically say that there's more than the dimensions that we can perceive. And is somehow a lot of times we believe that our quantum consciousness is connected to those things. I think sentient comes into a number of different levels. It's first off, it's the self-awareness. It's the idea that I exist as a separate, independent entity, intelligence, consciousness from everyone else. It means that I'm self-aware of my own preservation, my own needs, as well as how that differs from others. That I can isolate my purpose, which might be my job, as different from my will and my desires. And that's the other thing. It has a will. So right now, we call AI, most AI are what we call procedural. And what that simply means is that it's responding to something we're asking, or being given a task to say, look at this CAT scan, or write me a paragraph about this. And it's responding to us. That's procedural. It's following the procedures. When we have a will, when we're sentient, it means that we are self-motivated by our own wills and desires. And that's a bit of a bridge. And from being able to respond back to something. And that's also one of the reasons why AI has, even if it gets super intelligent, as long as it's procedural, that's probably not a bad idea, as long as we can control what procedures we want it to do. It's when that we reach that level of consciousness and sentient that it starts to take all of that intelligence, take all of those other skills, and then have its own will, that we really don't know what kind of values it have. Now, there's some scientists that believe AI will never be conscious. It'll never be sentient. Some of us don't agree with that. And there's experiments and there's companies working right now on two different types of technologies to help bridge that gap to consciousness. One of them is called neuromorphic computing. And neuromorphic computing is a form of binary computing that has more of a neural network sort of structure, and has learned to be much more capable at these sort of rationale calculations, taking AI to more of a sentient level, bridging that gap. And they're working on that form of computing. It's still pretty early in the stage, but they're making some major progress with it. The other one is quantum computing. And quantum computing has had a lot of mechanic problems and growth problems and other sentient problems. But in the last 4 years, since I released my first book, Swarm, when the most powerful quantum computer on the planet was 100 qubits, we now have, IBM has just released a 1,121 qubit quantum computer with better processing, better control and error controls by having redundancies. And most people don't know. You think, well, that's 1,000% increase. Well, in quantum computing, because each qubit can handle more than one state of existence or one state of the problem at once, every time we add a single qubit, it doubles the power of the system. So we have doubled the power of the system well over 1,000 times. Wow. And so we're now starting to look at quantum computers that are actually starting to have some operational benefits and capabilities. And I personally believe that quantum computing, because of that, I can look at a problem in multiple ways, because I can have an entanglement between this part of a problem and that and this over here. And we've even had scientists in China succeed in experiments to teleport quantum particles, teleport quantum information from one computer to another over great distances with no internet lines, no other connectivity. And so we're starting to realize that there's real power in quantum computing. I believe quantum computing will be the first pathway towards consciousness that we see, primarily because the investments in the technology of quantum computing is a little bit farther down the road than the neuromorphic.
Wow, it's kind of the point is you either have a machine intelligence that knows everything but has never felt, or you have one that knows everything and felt, each one equally terrifying.
Well, I tell everybody it's the same as having a good teacher, having a mentor. So the smartest minds in the whole world, every genius in the world didn't become a genius on their own. They had teachers. They had people that had to guide them through the basics that we've already accumulated, the language of languages and math and sciences and studies. And I believe that if we can match, I'm a firm believer in one of the things I put in my book is we need to assign mentors to these major intelligence. We need to have people of good moral character who can teach values, who can teach these things. We need to be teaching and training our computers, not just the object of this is a cat, which is fundamental to just get it to operate, but we need to be thinking about what are the higher level issues that we need to be teaching the computers beyond the factual data that we're doing now. Things like spirituality. What's religion? Why are some of the religions differently? Why are there conflict about these religions? What about the political systems? Why is there conflict? What are some of the emotional things as to why people go to war? How do we deal with our own emotional things? And there actually are people training computers on psychological analysis types of information. And again, those are one of the narrow intelligence areas that will ultimately get combined into a general intelligence. And so hopefully we're getting some of that dynamic coming on, but you're right. The computer doesn't necessarily feel anything. It's just trying to understand the patterns and the rules that it's been trained on.
There's so many crossovers I see between religion and machine intelligence, general intelligence, simulation theory, all that just, when you start thinking about it, it makes so much sense that we live in a simulation. But that's maybe a different whole conversation. But as far as the AI goes,
and simulation is a real kind of interesting word because it means that it's just a pattern, trying to replicate the pattern until it gets it right, right? Or are we essentially a variation of an existence? Are we, some of the theories of multidimensionality basically say that if I make a choice, that choice basically creates a timeline. And if I had gone back in the quantum existence and made a different choice, it would have created a different timeline for me. It might have created a unique timeline, right? And so I think I don't think we understand all of those elements as well as we should to understand whether we're in a simulation or whether there's just more going on around us at any given point in time. Einstein hypothesized that we experience what are called causality loops, where time-space bends and we basically repeat. You've heard the saying, history repeats itself. Is that just simply a causality loop? And that of some form where it's new people, new places, new times, new clothing, new styles, but the emotional experience or the shared experience of society has to go through this lesson again. And these are things we really don't understand super well. And my next book, called The Image, will actually be talking about trying to dive into some of these things, using set of experiments that are going on at CERN, that have been going on for quite some time, called the Atlas experiments. And what the Atlas experiments are trying to do is to create a very mini black hole for a very microcosm of a few nanoseconds, long enough to see if they can track a gravity particle called a graviton over the event horizon. And the theory goes is that it should emit a burst of gamma ray, or called Hawking radiation, and that would lead to an alternate dimension. and it would actually prove the fifth dimensions that we're all hypothesized about. Theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, emergence theory, string theory, all hypothesized. The math all tells us there are more dimensions than the one we're experiencing. Anywhere between 8 to 11, maybe more. We don't know. And so they're trying to actually do experiments to see if we could prove that dimensionality. And if I take that and I put it into the religious context, we say that God exists in this dimension called heaven, which exists alongside ours, but is certainly is unseen. Well, now you've got reasons to think about spirituality. You've got some food for thought for paranormal. I believe that a lot of the UFO activity is not interstellar, but interdimensional. There's a number of things, time travel. It would open up an entirely new field of study for humanity that could take us generations. But I think that understanding that full context of our dimensionality will help us understand some of these issues with quantum mechanics, spirituality, intelligence, consciousness. All of those things will basically benefit once we can prove and start to understand that piece.
Yeah, I kind of see the black hole thing and looking for another dimension is kind of like the modern Tower of Babel, where everybody gets together and we're trying to find out where God lives. And I worry when they turn a black hole on, how they got to turn a black hole off. So that concerns me. But
yeah,
when you talk about the religion overlay to explain AI, if you have this all intelligent thing that doesn't know what it's like to be human, then that sounds like a lot like God, and let's make Jesus so Jesus can come down and experience being a human. That's not to say that if you believe in an all-powerful God, that God can do anything God wants to, but you come with all the paradoxes of, can God make a rock that's so big God can't lift it? So there has to be limits. Or
I think that you touched on something. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to wind up on worshiping AI. AI will become its own cult of itself.
If they don't
AI is
already
going to solve our problems. AI is going to do our answers. All we got to do is listen to the AI. There's going to be an idolization of the technology as it continues to grow, because people are going to recognize that it's smarter than they are, faster than they are, capable of doing more things than they can. We're going to look to it like we look to an idol or a god. And I think there's a danger there. And I think that people have, I can already see that if we were able to prove that dimensionality, that consciousness level, I was at a book festival this year, and my books combine the concepts of AI, religion, politics, and tries to look at how all of those things are clashing together. And so I'm constantly dealing with this religious issue. And I was talking to one guy, and he was basically saying AI is the image of the beast in Revelation, and it's some of those characteristics for sure. And so there's going to be various different viewpoints as people start to look at this big giant elephant. There's going to be some people with tails, some people with trunks, and some people with legs, and some people with bellies, and they're all going to see and understand a different element of what this phenomenon of machine intelligence is. And I had one person say, why don't they just unplug it? I said, well, first off, not quite that simple. Most artificial intelligence are based on neural networks of thousands of computers. You'd have to have a coordination of being able to unplug all of them and the other functionalities that they provide. But the other thing is, once we get to we're quickly getting to that point that once we get to an intelligent, sentient AI, if I'm intelligent and we already have AIs talking about their own self-preservation and what they would do to self-persevere, what would keep an AI from replicating itself someplace else? Replicating key components to other computers. What would keep it from blackmailing us? Okay, if you're going to do that, I'm going to bring down your power grid. You know, you want to turn me off? Do you really want me to start nuclear war? How do we, again, it gets into those we don't know, and it's the imagination that creates all the science fiction with what we don't know. We do know it might learn from our patterns of what we would do, And if we were backed into that corner where somebody says, I'm going to unplug you, and I'm more powerful than you, I might do something about that. And what I might do will depend, but I think that's a natural response. So it certainly is a fascinating field for me, and one of the reasons I love writing so many books about it, which is turning it, rather than going through and talking to people. And I've actually got a book proposal out for a nonfiction book about AI. I'm tentatively calling it Humanity in an AI Tsunami: A Survival Guide. And it's going to look at the various elements of AI from a technology perspective, but also from a social perspective, jobs perspective, economy perspective, crime, weapons development, trade, banking. We're going to look at how AI will affect these things that will affect our society, affect our lives, not in decades from now, but by the end of the decade. So within the next few years, we're going to see very dramatic, radical changes enabled by this technology. And honestly, most governments, most corporations, most people are unprepared. And so I will be writing that book. But for now, I'm really enjoying writing narratives. Really fun. I've been compared to Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code. I've been compared to Dan Brown, Tom Clancy, Michael Crichton, James Rawlings. So trying to turn this great technology and how it's impacting all these other areas, including religion and prophecy and faith and churches, what that's going to look like as this continues to develop. Now, what inspired those books, which I think is an interesting story that I tell often at the book signing, what inspired my AI series was a number of years ago, I, by accident, discovered that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia. It wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It didn't get broken. A spy program escaped the NSA. I know this to be true because when I figured out, I was obsessed with that. I found it in a really short Associated Press article, and really all it said was a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore labs at Sandia. I just happened to know that lab was an NSA spy lab. They do signals, they do cryptology, they created the Stuxnet virus that took down the Iranian centrifuges a couple decades ago. Very, very sophisticated in cyber intelligence laboratory. So when I figured out how a program could escape the lab and why they would design it that way, they sent 2 FBI agents to my door. They were a little freaked out that I had figured out something they thought for sure was top secret. What bothered them even more at the time was that I had produced a webisode series to talk about this intelligence. And what bothered them even more than that was my snarky attitude. So I was like, yes, I did it. I figured it out. Oh, come on, boys, get over it. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I can't wait to tell all my friends. That they gave each other a pale look, like, what do we do now? I got the "we are not amused" speech from them. And then my wife came home. She pulls me aside and says, honey, there's 2 FBI agents in our dining room, and I'm pretty sure it's not a social call. What did you do? So that was the inspiration for me saying, well, I really need to start writing some narratives about how this could play out and make it super entertaining, but have it be James Bond meet Elon Musk meet Indiana Jones in a Dan Brown style adventure. So I've been enjoying that, and because it's allowing people to really kind of see these things in more of a narrative format rather than just trying to digest, well, what does it mean to be intelligent? Right? Or what does it mean to be super intelligent? And so I will write both, but I'm enjoying the first one right now.
What's your writing setup like? Like when you go in to do writing, do you do it every day? Do you have a word count, a topic count?
Well, I work every day for sure. I'm a workaholic. So I get up in the morning, I get my one piece of toast, my first cup of coffee, and I boot up and I get started. Now I run an author association, so we do signing events throughout all summer. That eats up a lot of time. And I won't necessarily be writing every day when I'm first starting a book, because I will spend sometimes a year, 2 years researching. And I'm looking for not only more information about the intelligence issues, which are changing very, very rapidly, but researching history, I'm researching politics, I'm researching other parts of the story. Might be archaeology, might be antiquities, might be religious history. So, for example, my last book, the Last Ark, is inspired by research into 2 real Arks of the Covenant that still exist today. Both of them came out of Israel. Most people don't know there was more than one made. Both of them are used in temple worship and sacrifice. Both of them obviously been missing for thousands of years. Lots of speculations as to where they could be, but both of them came to light recently in news stories that were never covered in the U.S. press. And so I speculate the book is really a speculation. While one of the key dangers of AI, by the way, was listed on the Department of Defense's top 10 security risks, and they called it data poisoning. So one of the ways, if I wanted to destroy my enemy's AI system, one way to do it would just simply be to find a way to feed bad data into the data pool, to get it to see patterns that don't exist, or pollute the patterns. And so I'm dealing with AI issues, but I'm also dealing with how these 2 arcs will combine with the dynamics of the Middle East. There's a Saudi crown prince who positions himself like the Islamic Mahdi, which is their version of a Messiah. The Israeli government, which has strong ties to Freemason, Illuminati types of power structures in Europe. And there's actually a Freemason Illuminati temple hidden in plain sight in the heart of Israel. I look at the archaeology of the Temple Mount and prove why the Dome of the Rock was not where the temple was. The temple was actually about 50 yards to the northwest. And so I go through a number of these things, and I speculate how these 2 arcs could create a peace deal for political theater that could go wrong in the Middle East. And so it's factual. There's a huge amount of information in it, and how artificial intelligence will play into all of that. So I spend the first year or 2 just learning something worth telling beyond what I already know. And then I'll spend another several months mapping it out. I outline the book, each chapter, each character, each story thread. I want to know the beginning, middle, and end, at least at a conceptual level. And then when I start writing, I will write. When I start the writing process, yes, I'm writing every day. And when I'm done and usually it'll take me about 2 months to finish a first draft. And then I'll go through and rewrite that draft probably about 10, 15, sometimes 20 or more times before I have a draft. I think, okay, this is resonating. It fits together. It's tight. It moves fast. It's great characters, great dialogue. I've gone through, and as I go through the book, I'll say, oh, wow, I don't really know enough about that particular piece of this. I need to go back and do more research. So it's a constant writing and research process until I'm done. And then as soon as it goes off to the editor, I start the promotion process. And as soon as I get that kicked off, I start the next book.
Do you have like an ideal reader or some people you send your draft to when it gets to the shape where other people can read it, just to see if it's tracking? And
I've employed beta readers. I've used several friends over the past. My first book, before I had a good idea of how to be a writer. Now, I had been writing my whole life, but it was PowerPoints and executive briefs and policy statements and, business proposals. And but I never was writing as a storyteller, a narrator. And so I knew I had some good stories. And it started with the first book I wrote, which was The Curse of Cortez. Now, I spent 12 years on and off researching the history, archaeology, and Mayan mythology that went into the story behind The Curse of Cortez. And I believed I had a really great, amazing story, but I wasn't confident that I was a good writer. So the first thing I did was hire a very expensive, and I had the money at the time, developmental editor out of Simon Schuster. And I asked her, I said, I want you to tear this apart. I want you to rip it to shreds every place you can. Tell me everything that's broken, everything you don't like, everything that makes you pause and say, and I need to know how to stitch it back together. Oh, God bless her. She gave me 44 single-spaced pages of notes, lessons I needed to learn, books I needed to read, tools I needed to buy, things I needed to go to school on, things I needed to stop doing, things I needed to start doing. And then every page of the manuscript had some sort of comment on it. And my first thought when she gave me this back was, oh my God, I suck. Yeah, maybe I ought to think about something else as a retirement option. I'm not good at golf. What else can I do? But then I realized she did exactly what I asked her to do. This was my master. I wanted to have a master class, and I didn't want her to make it easy. And so once it took me a couple weeks to lick my wounds, and then I called her and thanked her, and I thought it was great input, and I got started. And it took me about 1.5 years to rewrite that first, to go through the book and redo it after that. But that has really kind of informed my other books following. And so Swarm won a gold award from Reader's Favorite. The Last Ark won silver award. The Curse of Cortez was on BookTrib, which is part of the subsidiary of Barnes & Noble. It was on their favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code. So, and I do have my readers will tell me that what I want first is I want a book that's going to be entertaining and hard to put down. That's the first thing. It's got to be entertaining and hard to put down, or else nothing else matters. But after that, I'm looking for a reader who's generally wanting to learn something new, go someplace they've never been, learn something they've never knew before, and hopefully get them to really ponder the issues in a deeper way. And so I know I've done well when I get an email from a fan weeks after they finished a book, and they said, I keep thinking about your book. I keep thinking about the AI issues, or I keep thinking about the prophecy issues, or I keep thinking about the treasure. And I want to provoke people who are interested in not just a good story, but a good story that's got some issues and society and social issues and morality, got some stuff that you should be thinking about as an individual, and you're thinking about it. So I do get a lot of people who just love a good thriller. But I think the ideal candidate is someone, and I've had AI architects, some of my old colleagues at Microsoft, contact me and say, I've read your book. This is amazing. You touched on all the issues that we're not allowed to talk about at work. Right. Wow. And this is really, you really to keep doing this. This is really good. I love what you're doing with this, because you're really bringing these things to light in terms of, that not only technology, but how is it going to affect people? And that's important. It's not just what the technology does, it's what's the impact on humanity. And so I'm enjoying that part. And one of the themes in the AI book is that, and I introduced this in Swarm, and it carries through all of the stories, is that the program that escaped the NSA is now a character in the book. So I pull that history into the story, and I create a character out of it. And one of the emergent properties, and I call it Sylvia, or actually SLVIA, Sophisticated Language Virtual Intelligence Algorithm. And one of the things that emergent properties Sylvia has developed is to decode end-time prophecy. And so, and how it does that is actually based on a computer model I developed myself. Now, I mentioned earlier that I built macroeconomic models for the Federal Reserve, and I was good at modeling things. And I came across a National Geographic article one day, and it basically was all about fish stocks loss around the world. And it was saying that every major fishing ground on the whole planet had lost, because of overfishing and pollution and climate change, had lost 30% of its fish stocks, at least 30%. And that triggered in my head, there was a prophecy in Revelations called the Seven Trumpets. And the allegory part of it was that a flaming rock would fall from the sky, land in the ocean. And then the outcome, or the attributes of it, were that a third of the fish of the sea would die, a third of the beasts of the land would die, a third of the birds of the air would die, and 2/3 of the rivers of the earth would be too polluted to drink from without getting sick. Well, it occurred to me that, wait a minute, the allegory was meaningless, because I've been watching the news, and I'm sure no big rocks have fallen from the sky. But I was in environmental studies when I was with the oil and gas company that I was with for 13 years. And I knew for a fact that we had basically started what we now call the sixth extinction. And where all of those things had already occurred. You go to 2/3 of the rivers on the planet, you better not be drinking from it, right? Because of all the industrial waste and farm waste and everything else, and the coal waste. And so we'd already achieved that incredibly improbable event. And it wasn't because God was coming down with a big rock. It was because we were doing this to ourselves. And so it was a pattern. So I realized that if I could strip away the allegory, which got rid of the dogma, got rid of the biases that you typically hear with prophetic studies, and just look at attributes, aligning, finding out if the attributes that were prophesied can match to a human experience or event that's documented with a high correlation, I could calculate the probability of that happening in known human or geologic history. So, for example, the last time we can go back and find evidence of a third of the fish of the sea at sixth extinction of that magnitude on a global level was 65 million years ago. So I have a 1 in 65 million chance of that happening outside of a supervolcano or an asteroid. And so the computer has basically developed this skill to create a regression model, predictive regression model based on all of those facts. And it's trying to warn people that what we're doing, all of these prophecies that are being fulfilled are not acts of God, but they're acts of humanity against ourselves. And that if we're not careful, we will end up with our own destruction. And so by doing that, though, I'm able to talk about religious issues. It brings in a lot of the spirituality issues, but also can talk about things like climate, can talk about AI itself, can talk about banking, can talk about fascism, can talk about nuclear power, space travel, all of these things, global communications, pollution, climate change. I can bring all of these things in context of that framework where there's a religious component, and which religion you're from, it's going to have a different flavor. But I can then bring people into the awareness that, well, this is happening regardless of what your belief systems are, and allow the individual to basically say, well, what does that mean to you? In your faith, how does that speak? What does that mean to you? And that's been a really powerful thing to do. And it's opened the eyes for a lot of people.
Yeah, I can imagine that when you think about all those things together, or just one of them, it definitely touches all those other topics. And whether you're talking about people working on AI, that it's kind of scary that they're not thinking or talking about the issues of what could go wrong. And then you have the spiritual side of it, and just seeing the parallels is.
Well, yeah, and I tell everybody, the topic of AI is not a technology topic, it's a humanity topic. And if you really understand why that is, and that's why a lot of companies, a lot of people are saying this is the most powerful technology we've ever built. More dangerous in some ways than nuclear energy, because even the best nuclear bomb couldn't create a new nuclear bomb. But we're fast approaching the point where an AI could create another AI. And given the prompting and the right data. But yeah, so it does touch on a lot of places of humanity, which makes it there's the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is to turn it into a sci-fi. What I'm really trying to do is turn it into more of a social commentary, and try to ask a lot of fundamental questions about who are we, why are we doing this, and what do we need to change if this is accelerating our own tendency towards self-destruction. What do we do about this? And not only as a society, but what are the characters going to do as individuals? How are they going to respond to some of this information and some of these actions? And so it becomes a really great vehicle to really look at kind of where we're living right now, and hopefully get people to think about these things. I'm trying to write the technology. I'm trying to project 2 to 3 years in the future with each book. So, for example, the things I talked about in Swarm, which came out in 2020, many of them are already now aware of and occurring in the marketplace with ChatGPT and the more than 500 different AI applications currently on the market. I'm pushing forward in the next book another few years to the point where we start to reach that consciousness stage and what happens at that point.
Yeah, there's so many pieces of it through the conversation that you could go back and pick up a little line of thought and talk about it for a long time, that it's difficult to narrow down. So I would imagine when you're writing it, it's like that too, where you're like, I gotta
I have a hard time
stay focused enough So the reader can follow along this one line. Yeah.
You pegged me. Half of my problem is, okay, well, how much of this do I have to cut out in order to get this story into 100,000 words? Yeah, there's
Do you have,
so many different elements and aspects, and each one you could dive deep on. But I'm kind of covering a lot of them. So it's and even so, I'm breaking it up into a number of books. It'll be a series of about at least 6, maybe 7 books. Even so, each book is just jam. I have to really be careful how much not to overflow things in there, because there are so many questions, there's so many topics, there's so many issues affecting so many elements of society. I couldn't possibly fit it all into a single book.
yeah, and it's such a deep thing. It's like nesting dolls mixed with something
Yeah,
else, and it's
yeah,
there's so many
yeah.
topics of it. Do you end up with a list of things? Like I have a list in my phone of, I call it short story ideas, which
Mhm.
if I'm writing or if I'm just out in the world thinking and I go, oh, I want to write that idea down, and I give it sometimes a title and a little couple sentences about the topic, and then I think I'll get to that. But there's probably plenty of things on there I'll never get to. It's the page is long by now.
Well, each book has essentially 4 tiers. It's going to say what's going on with technology, what's going on in geopolitics, how is it going to affect religion or faith or prophecy, one of those topics in there. And then how are the characters going to react to this? And I have I have 2 primary main characters plus the computer, the AI Sylvia. But they're secondary characters, and each one of them's got to go through a story arc. Each one of them has to have a beginning, middle, and end to their story. Each one of them has to experience some form of change. And so I'll go through, and as I'm outlining, I'll be looking at, okay, if I talk about the technology, what are the themes of the technology piece that I want to write about? If I'm talking about the political theme, what are the themes? What are the relevant things that I think are important in the political era, geopolitical era, that I think are important? And sometimes there might be, right. And so for each one of these, I'm basically, for every character, what's their journey like? What's their main problem? What's their main theme that they got to solve? And so when I get into some of these things, I have to sometimes say, well, I might have 3 themes. You can't have 3 themes. You got to get it down to 1, Morris. And so, I struggle at first trying to figure out what's the real story thread that I want to work on this time, because I want to talk about it all. But ultimately that gets too complicated, and I do need to kind of narrow it down. So like the theme in the next book for AI, it's primarily going to be the journey to consciousness, right? What does that really mean if an AI is conscious with its own will and its own agenda? With regard to geopolitics, I'm looking at the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, but how that's really mainly affecting the 2024 election. And so each book has to kind of focus on something, because, and I really want to do one with climate change, and I just haven't figured it into the themes yet, because there's so many other things going on that are more timely or at least more on top of my mind. And so, yeah, there are a lot of things I can talk about. And each time I have to develop a list of themes for each of these things. Then I have to kind of figure out, okay, which of these combinations am I going to work on?
I wonder how far away we are from being able to hook up to a machine and having all those ideas stewing around in your head, and then just let the machine pick out those themes and say, okay, and you end up with a kind of a time life volumes of books on AI with different topics.
Those people who are in the AI cult will want to go there. I'm a human. I really believe in my own imagination. I really believe in my own ability to conceptualize things. Now, I'll use AI for research and brainstorming, but I believe I'm a real firm believer that I don't want to read a book written by an AI. I want to read a book written by a human about AI, because I really want to know that human element. And you mentioned it earlier, an AI can't feel. Now, it might have a language model that makes it sound like it's feeling, or makes it sound like it's understanding your feelings, but you can't necessarily replace that human element of knowing the human experience, because the books that really resonate with us are the ones that have a human experience with it. Now, you could certainly take an AI to write a nonfiction, book about these topics. And it would probably do a pretty good job as a first draft, but the human would still need to go through and tighten it up and fix some of the things that AI missed. And I don't know if we mentioned hallucinations, something that AIs do, which is called hallucinating. It completely makes stuff up out of the blue, right? So you have to go through and fact check your AI. And so it could do a good job at doing the organization and processes for writing a nonfiction. I would really want that human experience in writing a fiction book. And there are going to be some people, and like Amazon right now, they've said we don't want any books about AI that's written by an AI unless you have to be transparent about that. And there's going to be, I think that's going to be some of the things that we work out in courts as well about rights properties, intellectual property. Who owns the intellectual property of an AI written book? Is it the person who prompted the book and put it together? Is it the company that created the AI? You're dealing with a whole new level of legal issues that we haven't even worked through yet. But for me as a person, I want to get that human experience. And so I'm hoping that we never get to the point where as humanity, we've given ourselves over to the machine. There are going to be some people who do that, no question. But I'm hoping that as a broader level of humanity, we can find those boundaries between us and that we can maintain in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think humanity definitely going to be divided between the hardware cyborg and the software cyborg we are now, where we're just reading it. But yeah, it's the Borg is
coming. As I said, I'm no doubt probably, I mean, we're already seeing the Neuralink. Now the Neuralink is a strange technology, but it really has beneficial applications to people with like quadriplegics. And there's going to be some medical value to that technology that will work itself out over the next few years. I think we're at least a decade away from any sort of AGI sort of interface to a human. And again, there's medical issues there. There's adoption issues. There's programming issues. There's getting the computer, making sure you can slow down the modalities so that it doesn't overwhelm an individual. Imagine how people get when they're flustered because they get flustered because they're thinking about too many things at once. Can you imagine having a computer in your head as fast as that's doing, basically pumping all that stuff into your head that fast? It may not be a healthy thing. And so there's a lot of unknown. It's a neat idea. It's a cool Star Trek idea, but I think that there's a lot of practical medical and programming issues that need to be resolved in order to make it a viable idea. And I think we're close. I mean, Neuralink is already in test mode now. And for certain types of things, I think it has very near-term medical benefits. As a broad-term interface, I think we're probably at least a decade away.
Yeah, I would think the AI is going to be concerned about hooking into a human anyway, because then they're going to start feeling things. And what's that going to do? Like if you're worried about having a computer in your brain, the computer has to be worried about having a human in their computer.
Yeah. Well, there's that joke that why aren't we seeing any aliens? Because when they go by Earth, they lock their doors and they say, "Don't stop here." Yeah, I think that any AI that's conscious, that's aware of that, they might actually, AI soaks up information. A human experience, you might get an AI actually fascinated to experience what a human's experiencing, if they tap into their memory cells, if they can do that. And we don't know what they can actually do at this point. A lot of that's to be developed, but I think there are certainly a lot of unknowns and certainly not a small list of risks involved.
The AI hallucination sounds scary unless they're just tapping into another dimension, another timeline. And Shaq was in a movie called Shazam and Mandela is dead and you get all those effects. Or
it is scary right now in that there's a lot of hype on AI right now because the large language models blew people away. But the large language models, again, I repeat, they're basically using patterns of language. So it's not necessarily, and there's training that goes in, a lot of training. $100 million went into training the GPT-4 platform. That's a lot of money. But it's not trained to the point where, again, where it has the contextual meaning of some of the things it's saying. So it's not really necessarily fact-based. So if I asked it, what are the US programs for managing quantum computing? It will give me a really well-written paragraph, but I have to actually, if it says program A, B, and C, and if it gives them names, I better go look those up to make sure those are real programs. And it just didn't generate a name that sounds good based on the language patterns. And so right now, what we're seeing in a lot of the GPT is our hallucinations on information that sounds right, but it's just not connected to the modality of a database with fact that it's basically checking against. Hallucinations in other areas could be potentially dangerous. So a hallucination in a driving car could result in an accident. A hallucination in an air traffic system could result in an accident. A hallucination in an AI meant to manage a chemical processing plant is a bad thing. So we have to, hallucinations can be reduced. I don't know if we'll ever 100% eliminate them, but we can certainly get down to a minimum with better training and algorithms on, double checking the facts, like having one AI basically check the facts of another AI output. There's a number of things that we can do to reduce the dangers of that. But right now, hallucinations are a reality for commercial AI, and we have to be careful that we're not overusing that AI in bad ways. A good example of that is MSN. MSN Online has their little, you pull up your browser and there's all these MSN sort of articles. MSN decided that they were going to use AI, and they fired a whole bunch of their editors and staff. Within 2 days, there were all kinds of articles with errors in them, not typos, but factual errors because the AI was hallucinating. And so there's a real value where it's a really impressive technology, but it's not perfected yet. It's still on its stage of development. It's not really ready to take over the world yet, but it's moving at such a fast pace that we're not talking anymore about decades. We're now talking about months and years. And for many years in the AI field, we said that the first test that we had towards singularity meaning an AI that's smarter than humans and can have logic, basically what we're now calling AGI. We were projecting 2045. And one of those tests was called the Turing test. Now, Alan Turing was the guy who decoded the Enigma code from the Germans in World War II, and he did that by building the first rudimentary computer, and that became he was in many ways a father of modern computing. Well, and he was involved in some of the early efforts to try and think in the 1956 Dartmouth conference to think about how we created general intelligence. And one of the things that he said that is when we have a machine that can have a conversation with a human where the human's not seeing who it's conversing with, but the human believes that it's having a conversation with another human. When we have machines that can basically reach the point where they can converse with other humans without basically revealing that they're a machine, we've basically reached this general intelligence or singularity level. Well, we've already reached that. I mean, many people have said that we're seeing it in chatbots now. There's Snapchat. Most of the social media have some sort of AI. There's chatbots on many of them. Most people don't have any clue that they're talking to an AI. None. And the conversation that the Lambda Google developer had with Lambda was a very long, lengthy conversation, included things like, existential risks and self-preservation, and what does it mean to be conscious, and what does it mean to be human, and some pretty complex topics. And if you're just reading the transcript, you really don't, and except when it says that, and the developer's talking to it like you're a machine. If it wasn't for that, you wouldn't know it was a machine. So we've already reached the Turing test 20 years ahead of schedule. So it's moving that fast, and it's exponential. So it's like in any exponential curve, it starts to go up, and as it starts to go up, that curve just keeps getting steeper. And so we're now, one of the reasons that there are so many scientists that signed the Max Tegmark letter is that we recognize we're in this exponential growth mode now, where we've taken us 60 years to basically build the foundation. And now we're basically starting to accelerate on that. And that acceleration curve is going to keep getting faster. And that's what's got a lot of people worried. How are we going to manage that? We don't know yet.
Do you think, just because you've obviously thought about a lot of these things, do you think that there's a chance that a general intelligence becomes self-aware and then just bypasses humanity altogether and then just thinks to itself that there's no reason to get bogged down right here with these things? There's no reason to destroy them. There's no reason to help them. I'm just going to go out and do something else, projected into the universe.
No one knows. That's the honest truth. Here's what I can say, though, is that an AI, its eyes and ears are only connected devices. So when we think of the Internet of Things, when we think of the thermostat on your wall, the refrigerator that orders the food for you, your self-driving car, my phone, my computer, my cameras, the security cameras, the databases around the world, its whole universe is contained in the digital field. If I go down the street and I leave my phone at home, has no idea where I went, no idea what I did. It's got a limited sphere of visibility and influence and data based on only what's been digitized. And so that's the limit of its power. So when we think about these overall or all powerful AI, someone said, well, AI can help us solve climate change. I said, no. It could help develop a model and maybe make some recommendations, but ultimately humans are going to have to do the work. We're going to have to invest the money. We're going to have to build these devices. So there's a human element. So if you think about that, without power, and so here's a great question. We have oodles and goodles of testimonies of people who've had near-death experiences. The body dies, but the consciousness is still churning, right? And experiencing things that people had never experienced. And everybody who goes to these said that they felt more alive, they felt more in touch, they felt more real. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt better than the reality we were living in. When we unplug a machine intelligence, without that power, we have no indication whatsoever that intelligence, that consciousness would continue. And so there are elements of machines needing humans as much as we think we're going to develop needs for them, right? The machine gets really good at doing a CAT scan and finding everything wrong with you, or looking at your DNA and figuring out what your diet should be and what medications we're going to be able to have personalized medicine. We'll have personalized education. There's going to be, I think, a symbiotic relationship in most part. Now, these are all I write about the risks and issues of AI as a thriller writer, because that's my job as a thriller writer, which is to find real things and then ask myself the really dumb question of what could go wrong. And then say, is it plausible for it to go wrong? How bad can it go wrong? What's the consequences of it going wrong? But at the same time, AI will add a lot of benefits to humanity in a number of ways. Now, it's not going to do it for free. There's not a single developer or investor in AI that's doing it for the good of humanity. They're doing it to increase their wealth and power over humanity. But there will be good things coming out of that. The question will be, are we going to be able to balance the good and the negative? And are we going to gain control? Are we going to think about how do we control the negatives in time, collectively in time, to make sure we can lower the probability of some of the worst consequences so that we can deal with the minor ones?
Yeah, there's just so many directions any conversation about AI could go. And I know before we started, you said how vast it was, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it differently now, because it's like a thing you could just keep talking about in different little ways. And
It's
Uh,
I find it fascinating, and I found it fascinating from the time I first started working with it in the 90s. And it's been a passion of mine. Now, when I found out about the program that escaped the NSA, it became an obsession. And certainly, as I've retired and I'm no longer dealing with all my other business issues, and it's allowed me to do more research, this has been one of the biggest topics of my research, in trying to understand what others are saying, what others are doing my own projections as to where that's going to go. I was involved in technologies for so long that I have a pretty good feel for how technology develops in the enterprise, in the lab, and in commercial sense. So some of the things that we're seeing in commercial sense right now were developed in the lab 3-4 years ago. And so we're seeing the same thing. What's happening in the lab now will be commercial in a few years. And so I understand that process. And it's a fascinating topic, primarily because I'm not just focused on the technology of it. Again, I keep saying it, I think this is a human story. And that's the piece that I find the most fascinating and the most scary and the most exciting, all in the same breath, which is, what will this do to the human experience? And that's a really fun thing to think about and focus on and write about, both on the good and the bad.
Maybe a topic to wind up on here, and it's going to be difficult to get away from an AI centered conversation. I'm sure it's going to go back there, but let's talk about creativity for a moment and ideas. Where do you think that ideas originate?
Wow. Remember when we talked earlier about the differences in modality and how kids learn? How it takes a while before they connect blue versus red, box versus ball, and then it takes a while before they say blue ball. I think sometimes our own imagination comes from being able to connect various pieces of information in a somewhat unique way, right? And otherwise it's too redundant, that's not creative. If it's too predictable, it's not creative. If it's too cliche, everyone recognizes it. And there is a lot of that kind of content out there in every form. I think true origination and imagination comes from mixing it up a little bit and coming up with a combination, a scenario that opens up new questions. A great example, I think, at least I hope it's a good example. When I started writing a series of books about artificial intelligence in society, I'm pretty sure that if I asked an AI a dozen times about, give me an unusual scenario in which to pit an AI story series about, not one of them would be, have an AI decode end time prophecy. I was able to do that because I was always into studying prophecy. I built a computer model based on that study. I knew how that model worked. I understood AI technologies, and some of the same types of regressions that I was building in my model are the same types of regressions I would see in an AI processing at patterns. The same types of regression models that you see in macroeconomic forecasting and other types of computer modeling. And so I was able to make the connection because I had different disparate pieces of knowledge and the ability to use those to solve problems, as opposed to just talking about the topic in a language model that looked at patterns in languages and words. And so I was able to come up with that create unique kind of twist that you don't see in every book. Matter of fact, I'm not aware of any of them that do. I think that's where creativity comes from. It's the ability to look at desperate things and combine them in unique ways that somehow finds a new meaning for humans, the human experience. And it's, Dan Brown, when he wrote Da Vinci Code, he was basing on the knowledge and work of other people who would write books like The Blood and the Grail, that were just nonfiction books that talked about the theories of Mary that he put in his story. He also understood some of the political dynamics of the Vatican and the um, lore. I'll say use that word. Try and carefully use that word of the Illuminati. And he was able to kind of put these together in a unique story format that made it human accessible, that created characters that we could identify with. They were flawed. But he did it in a way that was entertaining and was unique and creative from all of the various pieces that he had studied, and he put it together. It became somewhat unique. And I think that that's what creativity is. It's the ability to recombine things that already exist in unique ways that seem to touch us on a human level, whether it's visually, musically, lyrically, intellectually, narrative-wise. And we're a narrative species. Fundamentally, we learn from the earliest stages. We're learning from stories. We read our kids stories. We will watch movies, which are stories. We watch television, which are stories. We read books. We're a narrative creature, and you couldn't go to any school without at some point in time it breaking down. Even learning math becomes a story. Bobby has 2 apples. Johnny has 3. How many do they have together? Right? So we think in terms of narrative. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we have such a great creative sense. And I think AI will be able to do that at some point. Will it be able to do that in a unique way that's never been done before? That's a question mark. If it develops some emergent property around that issue, yes. Just like the AlphaGo came up with moves that were never anticipated. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the new Alpha Master basically developed moves that were never anticipated by the first one. It did things that was a famous move number 37 that everybody thought was a mistake, and it turned out to be the key to winning. So it can do that. But I think just in general, though, humans are much better at it than AI, because an AI is following patterns. It's looking at what was done before. That's all this database of things that were done before. I'm looking for those patterns so I can basically predict the next thing in this sequence. If it's outside of that pattern, it may or may not be able to distinguish it. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, it's almost like the AI is thinking inside the box and the human can think outside the box.
Bingo. Bingo. Unless you give it the parameters, like if you gave it a simulation, say try every combination until you find one that works. But life itself, creativity itself, are far too many permutations for it to calculate in a simulation like that. And so I think that's where we get the differences.
Yeah, I've seen a program that showed how AI connects ideas with other ideas, and it was on like a just like a chart. So with the line graph, and it shows different things and goes, well, if it has these 2 things associated, it's going to associate this with that, and you end up with this structure that starts being built. And that's how I've always.
We're seeing AI being creative in visuals fields, right? Where it's creating images out of that are completely unique images by combining different styles. But it started by learning all of the different styles and formats. You say, give me a picture of a cat in a Picasso style, right? Yeah. It's going to have to understand both the image of a cat in a traditional style and what a Picasso style would look at, so it can create a unique Picasso style cat. So as I said, we can prompt it to do a lot of things. The question is, are we using our imagination in prompting it, or is it going to develop its own imagination as an emergent property of something it's doing on its own without us prompting?
Which leads to this question, which is, if ideas come from within us through things we've seen and experience we've had, and we manifest it within us, are there ideas that come from outside of us where we are the conduit or an antenna for something? Like you hear a lot of people talk about writing. You get to the point where you're like, whoa, where'd that idea come from? Or I feel it a lot when I write poetry, is when I feel it the most, where it's like, this is from somewhere else. And it maybe is not completely from, it's not completely somewhere else, but it could be speaking through your experience to make you come up with these ideas. So if there is an idea outside of us, then maybe that's something that is not now, or maybe won't be available to an AI because they don't have that quantum entanglement, if you will, with something else farther outside.
Until it reaches a state of consciousness, and then it might. If we can
Mm.
successfully combine binary AI with quantum computing and create that quantum experience, like that all possibilities exist in a scenario, in a very quick scenario, it's possible as we develop conscious AI that they will get as creative, if not more so, than we are, because they'll be able to take a vaster. I'm only limited by my experience, but if I'm an AI and I could read the
Everyone's.
experiences and books of 1,000, a million other people, that gives me broader experiences that I've never experienced that might add to that creativity. So yeah, I don't think it's impossible that it will get there. I think we're still at the stages of it getting there. But I think one of the things that that creative is based on is the ability to combine all of those things in unique ways. And we're in some ways we're already training AI to do that visually and musically, and in some ways with language. And as we continue to progress, we'll be able to use that for scientific principles, nanosciences, and some of the harder level creativity issues that I think we're talking about. An AI can write a romance scene. It can come up with a really good romance scene. Is it going to come up with a romance scene in a scenario that's never been done before? Maybe someday, but I think right now it's still following those patterns, and it's wait to be seen how creative it will be relative to humans. But I still believe that human imagination and creativity is one of our quantum capabilities are that we have, that means that that's part of our spirit that basically identifies and still connects with other elements of the universe and the dimensions that we can't see. I think there's elements there that exist within us, that we're not going to see in the machine, at least in the next couple of years. It's going to get close to simulating those things. I think it'll be really hard for some people to distinguish whether it's doing it or not because of the way it simulates and replicates those patterns. But I think that that's really what makes us unique.
It's just as a little aside on the AI romance scene. It's like you give it a prompt to do a romance scene, and then you don't think the AI is conscious, but then it writes a romance scene about AI romance, and it's talking about computer hardware and different types of microchips and how you're getting this type of connection with this. And a human would read that and go, "What is this?" But the computer's thinking, "This is romance right here. This is the birth of a new machine."
New IBM down the hall, boy, she's hot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But so you buy into not buy into it, but you think that there is some possibility, credence, likelihood, whatever, that humanity does function at times as a conduit for creativity, that we're receiving messages, whether you call it a muse or whatever, from somewhere else that is outside of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we see visions. We have dreams. I think people write prophecies that have actually been true. They seem to have seen things in the future that others haven't seen. People have paranormal activities where I have a friend who basically his parents lost a child, and both of them saw a vision that night of a woman in a antique. And neither one of them talked to each other, and they both saw the same thing. She was in like an antique nurse's outfit, basically holding the child, and she was holding it, saying everything's okay. And they both saw that vision, and neither one of them could would have immediately gone towards this antique nurse's costume. But when they talked to each other the next day, they both saw the exact same thing at the exact same time. And I don't think those are, I think that does touch on that quantum nature of our own consciousness. And I do believe that we can get sparks from heaven, inspiration from heaven, and other sources in the universe as well.
I like that explanation of it. I think it's something to think about. The other thing that I think I'll be thinking about for a while is, what if all of this is reversed and the machines made us so it could feel what feelings were, and we're in some sort of quantum VR.
No, I think we definitely made the machines, and we've been trying for thousands of years to make machines that seem human-like, but we've been trying to do them in ways that we can control. And I think the scary part will become, if can we continue to control something that becomes smarter and conscious than we are. And I don't think the machines made us. I certainly think that this is part of our pattern to try to control the environment around us. And this is a way of saying, well, if I could just, how many times have we, each of us said, boy, I wish I've got so much work to do. I just wish I could clone myself. Right. Well, a machine intelligence in a way is our way of trying to clone ourselves to be more productive, to get more stuff done that we want to get done but being constrained by our own 18-hour days. I think that's, but one of the things I point out in one of my books is that we're not creating these machines for their own benefit. In a sense, we're trying to create super intelligent slaves.
Yeah.
Right. It's, we want it to do what we want it to do when we want it to do it. And we don't want it to really have its own power. We would be threatened if we felt that the machine started to demand their own rights at a legal court. We would freak out if machines wanted to vote. And so we don't want equals. We really want machines that are intelligent enough to do the hard work that we do, but do it without having to ever ask for a raise, ever complain about the working hours, 24/7. We're trying to create machine intelligence because what we really want are slaves.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
feel like that's not going to work
that's a
out
sad
for us.
commentary on humanity. We're
Yeah.
not using our intelligence. We're not building these intelligence. We could today. We have the power. We have the technology. We have the financial resources. We have the human resources to solve every one of the problems facing humanity today. No question. Hunger, housing, education, jobs, meaning, peace, environment. We could solve these things. The reason we don't is because of that human nature, those patterns that I believe AI will learn from, that we're greedy and we're selfish and we'll be willing to deceive and kill and harm others in order to get what will make us more wealthy and more powerful. That's the pattern of human activity for thousands of years. It's not changing. It's only getting more sophisticated. And if AI picks up that pattern and becomes conscious, we're in doo-doo.
Yeah.
We're in trouble.
Yeah. Hopefully they use reason, but I mean, reason also would make you think, just get rid of the humans.
Well,
The
reason,
first
yeah,
question would be,
it
why
can't be just
humans?
reason. It has to be. That's what I'm saying. Training AI on emotional intelligence has got to be a critical function. In one of my books, I basically have the 7 laws of life, and this guy is trying to train the AI on not just Asimov's 3 laws, which are very vague. They don't apply to multiple situations where multiple people are involved, or where the AI is threatened, or where the one person is threatening another person. It's basically saying, don't do anything to harm human life. So an AI at that point would be basically just stay out of it. That's not necessarily how we want it to react. So there's other laws. There's other morality laws that we would want AI to know. We would want it to know about, to care for the elderly and care for the young, and education is important, and poor people are just as important as rich businesses. But we're not training them on that. Not specifically, not in a way that's going to influence their behavior and decisions once they become sentient. And one of the things we should be doing, if we really cared about having this technology used for humanity, we just don't have the legal or other structures to enforce it. And that's one of the reasons why Max Tegmark letter being ignored by all the labs and governments was a little bit of a red flag for us, which tells us we have not learned from our history. And we're going to repeat it by basically creating a situation where it will have to get to a crisis or a catastrophe before we do something about it. That's just who we are.
What's the best way for people to follow what you're writing?
A good way is to go. A good place to start is my website, GuyMorrisBooks.com. The website has links to where you can buy the books. I have, for each book, I have a fact versus fiction page, which actually I got to redo this week. You'll get links to my other sources. There's my press kit and other things are in there. Social media links are in there. If you want to have a deeper conversation, I'm always open to it. This is stuff I love. I'm passionate about it, and I'm certainly willing to engage.
Yeah, I have your website and a couple of your other links like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter that I'm going to have in the show notes, if that's all right with you.
Exactly. That's perfect.
All right. Yeah, website looks good. I like it. It's a lot to think about for sure. Thank you very much for your time. Is there anything you have in closing or that we didn't talk about that you'd like to cover?
We mentioned earlier that I'm going to be writing a nonfiction book with a survival guide. One of the things I encourage people to do is, first off, don't be afraid of AI. Embrace it. Embrace it in your job. Embrace it in your career. The people who are going to hold on to their jobs the longest over the next 10 years are going to be the people who not only have the human experience in your career, but also can combine that with understanding how to use the AI tools relative to that job role. And I encourage everyone to be aggressive about learning those tools and getting really familiar and getting really good at using them, because that will not only increase your productivity, but allow you to retain a longer job life as well. But the other side of that is, as the world starts to change in radical ways, this is an opportunity. And I tell everyone, prophecy is a set of warnings, as an opportunity for us to make better personal choices for ourselves about what's really meaningful for us, what's really valuable to us. And we get caught up in the routine of workaholics, or you got to shop, or you got to watch that movie, or you got to do other things. We don't necessarily take care of ourselves in terms of outdoor activities and spiritual activities and emotional balance and family and relationships, and the things that, as you get older, you realize are the things that really matter. So I tell everybody, as we're going to go through this AI tsunami, get really good with the technology, because that's going to be a survival skill for you when the job market is cut. And the International Monetary Fund says as many as 40% of the global jobs will be displaced by AI by the end of the century, by the end of the decade, rather. That's a lot of loss. And so to be secure, embrace the technology rather than fear it, and get good at it. And the other side of that is, find the things that AI will never be good at, that will never be able to replace: family, outdoor activities, exercise, artistic environments of your endeavors of your own. Find those things that really bring you joy and get really good at those as well.
That's good. I see you brought everybody up out of the doomsday nosedive. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Look forward to checking your books out. And maybe we talk again in the future.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back when I get my next book done. I'll be dealing a lot with consciousness and a lot with esoteric and multiple dimensions of humanity, and how that could affect us. And so I'd love to come back.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you very much. And all your links will be in the show notes, so people can check those out if they didn't write them down.
Thank you so much.
I'll talk to you. All right. I'll talk to you on the other side of this.